I recently got myself a VR headset and played all the games you're supposed to play when you get a VR headset. But I also recently learned a little bit about game development. So I started wondering, what if I try and make my own VR game? I loaded up a brand new Unreal project, plugged in my Quest, and had my first look in the headset.
Yo, what?
Yeah, so Unreal already gives you interactive hands, which is sick. And they also made a grabbable component, which meant that I could already start grabbing and throwing things. I also found out you could surf the sky by putting the cube under you. One thing not included, however, is player movement. We want to control our player according to the direction we are looking at. So getting our camera's direction for moving our player and scaling it up with their respective action values gives us some smooth movement. I wanted to shoot a basketball, and lately I've learned the basics of 3D modeling. So I modeled a basketball hoop, gave it some textures, and
Trap step. Pull up. Let's fucking go.
I also gave myself a 40-inch vert. The next thing I wanted to try and make was a realistic pistol. Because I didn't own such weapon, I watched an 18-minute video about reloading and unloading, which was really useful. I modeled a low poly gun with a barrel and mag, put it in the game, then installed a plugin called VR Expansion, which basically makes VR game development much easier. For example, I can now grab the gun in a certain way instead of freeform. Another important thing is the VR slider. We can make it a static mesh that moves along an axis, which I use for the slide. One thing I learned about the slide is when you pull it all the way, you should let it snap back instead of pushing it forward. Now the mag was a little more complicated. For it to move a certain way, I made it follow a spline, but for it to actually unload, I was lost. The only way I thought of was when we take it out, we hide it and spawn another mag in its place. Then to reload, I do the opposite. This definitely isn't the best way to do it, but it works. Adding shooting along with recoil was pretty simple, and now I am strapped. Now it's time to actually make a game. One of the most popular games on VR is called Job Simulator, which is pretty self-explanatory. And I started thinking of a job simulator I still play to this day, Papas Freezeria, the GOAT of games to play on a school computer. If you somehow don't know what this game is, you work at a frozen yogurt store, taking down orders, making yogurts, and get tips based on speed plus presentation. So let's start with the customers. I tried to model one of the characters, and after a couple hours, we have our first customer, Matt. I put him in Mixamo for some free animations, but then I realized that we need the frozen yogurt POI first. So I started by blocking out the store in Blender, then gray boxed the different stations. Since Papa's Freezeria is of course 2D, I had to improvise in some areas. Once I finished the rough block out, I added some simple colors and this checkerboard tile, then exported it as a USD. This allows us to preview everything in Unreal and make changes before actually importing. If you want more detail on how to do this, I left a tutorial in the description. One problem I experienced was my soft shadows being just black noise, which was actually kinda cool. Anyways, turns out it was just because I had zero anti-aliasing. I added some windows for better lighting, and taking a look in VR, it was looking pretty good, and so we could go back to working on Matt. The customer's AI is pretty simple. They walk up to the counter, order, wait for their order, then grade. The first thing I did was replacing the third-person character with Matt, as well as replacing all the animations with Matt animations, then put him in the game. For Matt to reach the counter, we can create a spline for him to follow. But now that he is here, he needs to order. I was a little stumped on this part, not on the actual ordering. We can do this by randomly selecting from an enum with different choices. That's the easy part. The hard part is the updating order ticket. Creating a texture for every order is obviously not the way. Instead, I used a widget, which for now is just text, that updates based on the order. Then setting it as a texture every tick gives us Matt's order. However, we only have the syrup mix, so I created enums for all the other ingredients. And now we have Matt's full order, which we can save and reuse. I also gave him an animation when he's ordering. With the ordering station done, I have to actually build the yogurt. I first modeled a cup with the yogurt base on the inside, then made it placeable on the build station stand. I did this by having a box collider checking for any cups that overlap it. If there is one, it makes the player let go of the cup and attaches the cup to the base. Now that the cup is placed, I added a button, and when we press it, yogurt comes out, which is just a cylinder being scaled up. I then made the yogurt in the cup microscopic, so when the yogurt starts pouring, we can scale it back up to make it look like it's being filled. Then for the syrup mix, I turned all the cubes into buttons that when pressed, changes the color of the cylinder. I did the same thing for the other side of buttons, but instead spawning the mixables, which I modeled in Blender. The final thing I added for the build station was the timing of the buttons, using a progress bar, and that's the build station completed. The mixing station was next, which was pretty simple. When we hit the button, start the mixing. However, during the mixing, the texture of the yogurt changes based on the mixables and syrup selected. I used the same logic for the order ticket by using a widget with a background color, and a bunch of transparent images that change into an image of the mixable selected. So selecting mango for the syrup and strawberries for the mixables, it shows when you start mixing. I finished the mixing station by putting a timer to indicate how long you've been blending for. But before we moved on to the toppings, I realized the store looked very dead, so I began decorating everywhere, using models of my own and models online. I also followed a cell shader tutorial and added some post-process effects to the game, as it fits the Papas Freezeria style more. The final station to make was the topping station. There are 4 types of toppings: cream, syrup, sprinkles, and placeables. For the cream, I was fully lost on. I modeled a bottle of whipped cream and cream on top of the cup, because the only thing I came up with is you take the bottle and just kinda slap it onto the cup. If you know any way on how to do this in 3D, please let me know. To make the syrup, I wanted to try out UnrealEngine's particle system, so I built a chocolate syrup fountain that shoots out of the bottle, and if the particles hit anything, it places a chocolate decal. However, what I did not know is decals only really work on static meshes, so instead of just spawning the decals, I also had to attach it to the whipped cream itself, which seemed to work. I used the same idea for the sprinkles, just randomizing the sprites, and lastly, the cherry on top. So that's about all I've gotten done with this project. I honestly wanted to do a lot more, like an interactive cash register, a drive-through, and I also did manage to make a grading system, which you will see with this gameplay, though it was really just a checklist to see if you did everything on the order. The grading system in Papas Freezeria is actually quite advanced. But the reason I have to cut this short is the GMTK game jam that is about to start in a couple hours. It will probably also be the topic for my next video, which will hopefully release earlier than my current fiendish upload schedule. In my defense, I am still learning game development, and thanks to this video, my game dev skills went from like a 2 out of 10 to like a 4. Anyways, hopefully you enjoyed this video.